Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nothing But Nugs podcast, part of the Elevated Pulse Sports family of podcasts by the fans, for the fans, diehards only. We've got a new logo, by the way, in case you didn't notice that, and an updated intro video. We had to get rid of some of the guys who are no longer here. I'm sure Eric is a huge fan of both of those things, right?
Love it. I was watching the intro video thinking, hey, I'm used to seeing some guys here that aren't here anymore. So love the new video. The new logo is super sharp. So yeah, pumped about it.
Absolutely. It's a vibe, man. I mean, it's the 2026-2027 season is pretty much right around the corner. So we had to freshen up the vibe a little bit, dude, especially since there's going to be just so many new guys on this team. And well, we're going to definitely dive into one of those situations today. But as per usual, if you've been tracking with our podcast for the past few weeks, we're sorry for taking about 2 or so weeks off. There really wasn't much to talk about. And so now we're back. And there's a lot to talk about, not necessarily at the NBA level, broadly speaking, in terms of the league, but with the Nuggets, obviously. Dude, Peyton Watson, the saga is finally over. Right? Whether or not you liked how it ended, the saga is finally over. Peyton Watson has been traded in that sign and trade to Cleveland, obviously. It was a 5-team trade in total. And I mean, ultimately, this was just kind of a hectic situation overall. Man. Any initial thoughts, Eric, before I kind of want to walk us through like the progression of the offseason so far to see how we got here and kind of maybe poke holes in how we ended up reaching this particular outcome. But any initial thoughts about this before we get into that?
I mean, I'll go through the steps and we can work our way here. I think, though, I was a lot like most Nugget fans. When we first heard about the trade, I think we weren't shocked that the trade was made. We were disappointed that we didn't get a player back. I think that's what hurt the most. It was the fact that, look, we were okay with the draft picks, but we didn't get a player back. So I think that was kind of a little surprising to me and a little disappointing. But let's work our way there because I think there are some other things we need to talk about as well.
Yeah, a lot of nitty gritties as to why this particular trade ended up happening. And so for sure, it would be valuable to just walk us through the entire offseason and then to see individually what exactly happened when it did and how we got here. So, I mean, at the outset, right, top priority of this offseason, one of them at least, was retaining Peyton Watson. Obviously, a restricted free agent, obviously a guy who was kind of the first 2 or so years he was on this team, picked up rotational minutes in his 3rd season, and then in the 4th season, it was kind of to begin the season, but then he got an opportunity, and he just absolutely shined, relatively speaking, and on some nights, not even relatively speaking, had multiple 30-point outings. Obviously, he got hurt towards the back end of the year and did not play in the playoffs, very unfortunately, but this offseason, regardless of that, there was enough seen that we were like, and the Nuggets, at least initially, were like, hey, let's bring Peyton Watson back. We have no reason not to. This is a guy who's young. He's only 23 years old. We want him to be a part of the future here in Denver, in the Jokic era and beyond. So that was a priority, obviously, this offseason. But, I mean, when we're thinking about Peyton Watson's skill set in general, there are some pros and to consider here. I mean, obviously, some of the pros of Peyton's skill set are that he has elite defensive tools, athleticism. You know, he can get around screens on offense. He's an improved spot-up shooter, at least this last season. And he's also an improved shot creator, and obviously he's good at penetrating the paint. So there is a lot to like about Peyton Watson, obviously, as a player. But, I mean, some of the cons potentially attached to Peyton Watson were the fact that he has succeeded in a relatively small sample size. It wasn't really until like a few weeks in 2025, 2026 that he actually showed up and showed out. He does now have a notable injury history, all right, having missed substantial time, almost about, if not more time, than he actually was playing incredibly well on the court. And obviously, one of the largest cons is the fact that he has no proven postseason success. He played in the postseason in 2024, 2025, was not incredible. And then last year, obviously, he missed. And so that was kind of the balance to consider with Peyton Watson heading into the offseason. Now, that said, Denver going in was pretty upfront about how important Peyton Watson was, right? They wanted to make it clear that they wanted to keep him around, and they were willing to, quote unquote, match any offer sheet up to $30 million in order to retain him. That said, that was going to be tough with the financial situation. And so Denver was expected to kind of pursue some trades to strengthen the supporting cast, obviously, from the prior season, but also make sure that they're operating within their certain financial constraints. They needed some financial flexibility in order to pick up Peyton Watson. And so despite that, they were confident and determined that they were going to be able to do so. But that said, I mean, even though there was no organizational mandate, at least communicated outwardly to like cut costs and make sure the Nuggets didn't push up on that second apron, throughout this process, it just kind of felt like that was kind of looming over nonetheless. And so, I mean, at that point, Denver started fielding calls for trades. They weren't necessarily shopping any players in particular. There was interest in Cam Johnson. There was some interest in Aaron Gordon. Not really much interest in Christian Brown, but none of those guys were being shopped. That said, they did make 2 free agent signings, all right, in bringing in Marvin Bagley and bringing back Tyus Jones. For whatever that's worth, they were involved in the Jaylen Brown sweepstakes and the LeBron James sweepstakes, and obviously both went to Philadelphia. But that said, the Nuggets were clearly, at least initially, indicating that they were going to be willing to try to spend at least some money or take on some money in order to make this team better. While also maybe moving off of some guys as well who were costing them too much for the value that they were or weren't providing. At that point in time, for whatever reason, after both the Brown and LeBron sweepstakes kind of failed from the Nuggets perspective, all of a sudden it seemed like they became open to Peyton Watson sign-in trades. It's kind of strange that ended up being the case, but that's kind of the timing there. And at the outset, Denver was looking for a Walker Kessler type of return for Peyton Watson, which was, the Walker Kessler deal was 2 first-round picks and 2 first-round pick swaps. So something in that ballpark. That's a pretty high desired package in return for a guy who kind of has that limited skill or limited sample size, not necessarily skill set. But I mean, that said, a sign and trade was almost completed for Peyton Watson. That kind of snuck under the radar. There was a 6-team trade that involved the Pistons and the Grizzlies, John Collins and Isaiah Stewart, that almost looped in a 7th and 8th team and included Peyton Watson going to the Clippers. So that would have been quite the situation at that point, in like early mid-July. But that said, the Nuggets seemed to be focusing elsewhere at the point in time. There was still a sort of negotiating impasse between both sides, and they decided to kind of put Peyton on the back burner, at least for a while. They went out, they signed Alpha Diallo to provide some wing depth. And even though the Nuggets felt confident that they were going to retain Peyton Watson, I mean, they were still looking around to add more depth at that general position. And so they brought in Diallo. They matched Oklahoma City's offer sheet for Spencer Jones, which did push them into the second apron. Maybe some people have thoughts about that now looking back on it, but that was the decision Denver made. And at this point in time, now that Denver was in the second apron, we kind of knew it would be tough for them to keep Peyton Watson. But regardless, that didn't necessarily mean that Peyton would not be on the team. He did, at least it was reported that he briefly was considering playing on that qualifying offer of $6.5 million next season and then entering unrestricted free agency in the offseason. And so at that point, there was just some weird stuff that began because DeMar DeRozan was released by the Kings and Denver began to express at least some interest in bringing him in. There were obviously other teams involved in that sweepstakes, but I mean, at that point in time, we were still thinking that Peyton Watson would be the priority, not necessarily a veteran like DeMar DeRozan. That said, Denver, a few days after that news came out, dropped their asking price in a sign and trade from that 4 or so first-round pick value to really about at least 2 first-round picks in a Peyton Watson sign and trade scenario. It was also around that period of time that Denver offered Peyton a 5-year, $70 million contract extension, which is only about $14 million in AAV. Peyton was obviously looking for something upwards of at least $24 million, ideally something in the over $25 million range. So this is very short of where he wanted to be in a contract that he got. That said, Denver did not really want a deal with Watson to exceed $22 million for the reasons maybe mentioned earlier, maybe other reasons as well. And at that point in time, since there was still that impasse, Denver dropped the sign and trade asking price again from 2 first-round picks now to 1 first-round pick and 1 quote-unquote high-level player. Interesting. Very interesting drop in expected return on some of these potential scenarios here in sign and trade. But I mean, that said, there were still plenty of teams interested. Okay. You had Milwaukee, you had the Clippers, you had Atlanta hop in, even before Cleveland decided to join the mix. And all of them were offering some different incentives in trades, but also some different trade-offs, right? So like, for example, Milwaukee was willing to take on some Zeke Naji in exchange for Peyton Watson in a sort of sign and trade scenario, but they weren't willing to send any first round picks. The Clippers were willing to send someone like a Derrick Jones Jr. back in return to the Nuggets, but not necessarily any draft capital, at least based on what was communicated. And so there was a lot for the Nuggets to consider at that point in time. Now, the Nuggets continue adding wing depth in the midst of the Watson impasse, and they signed Lonnie Walker to a veteran minimum, officially on a training camp deal. But if he were to make the team, he would be on a 1-year veteran minimum contract. So the Nuggets keep adding depth at the wing spot and still are not solving the Peyton Watson situation. And it was at that point in time that Cleveland began trying to explore Max Strus and Dennis Schroeder trades to try and clear up space to pursue Peyton Watson. Even James Harden pushed back his extension with Cleveland in order to let them poke around that situation. And so it was at that point in time that Denver actually updated their contract offer to Peyton Watson to 4 years and $70 million, dropped a whole year off to increase the AAV to $17.5 million with a team option. So this is just totally a team-friendly deal, right? I mean, the Nuggets were retaining all the leverage in this situation with the offers that they were making. That actually ended up frustrating Peyton Watson's camp a little bit, and it was shortly after that offer was made, a few days, that Watson was eventually traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers in that 5-team deal and signed a 4-year, $88 million extension with the Cleveland Cavaliers that included a player option and a trade kicker. So like super player friendly deal that Peyton Watson got to sign with Cleveland. The Nuggets in return in that 5-team trade got a 2021 first round pick, 2032 first round pick, and also forward Julian Reese, who was on a 2-way deal, who for some reason the Nuggets waived. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but that really didn't make much sense. Ultimately, though, Denver, since they had been pushed into the second apron from retaining Spencer Jones, they were unable to take back salary in any sign and trade situation, actually, which is why they did not get any players back in that deal. And it was at that point in time that Denver directed their attention to DeMar DeRozan. And lo and behold, here we are, just a few days after all this plays out. DeMar DeRozan signs with the Denver Nuggets on a 1-year veteran minimum contract. And whether he'll start in or slot into the starting lineup somewhere or come off the bench is still yet to be determined. But that is how we got to where we are today. I've just done a lot of talking, Eric. I think you've got to provide us some insight here on where exactly in this story everything, quote unquote, went wrong for the Denver Nuggets and Peyton Watson.
Yeah, I think when you watch, just kind of the way that that free agency worked out, I don't think it was as open as, Peyton Watson's camp probably thought it was going to be. I think they thought there was going to be more offers coming in than what they ultimately saw, because I think they feel his talent, his age, and what he was able to display for that, we'll call it a month or so, really showed a high level, of talent. But I think what happened was, you saw, LeBron, I think Jaylen Brown kind of caught people off guard. And then all of a sudden you have essentially a super team kind of built in the East. And I think there were a lot of teams, whether it was East or West, saying, well, how does that change our, way of looking at things? How are we going to change what we do or how we build our team? And I think from the Nuggets standpoint, you hit it right on the head. The Nuggets they wanted to keep all the leverage because, quite honestly, right now the Nuggets don't have very much leverage outside of that Peyton Watson, free agency. They don't have leverage with anything else. They didn't have any tradable first round picks. They didn't have things that they could move. Like we've talked about it on the show before. Nothing against Zeke Naji. I bet you Zeke Naji is a super cool guy and like really nice and people love him. But on NBA teams, other NBA general managers don't love him enough to say, yeah, we'll take him off your hands. So I think the Nuggets kind of were caught between a rock and a hard place, with the cap being what it was. I know they said all the right things, but quite honestly, I don't think in any world we would have ever seen them match a $30 million per year offer. That just was never going to happen, especially seeing the way things worked out. Now, I know we're going to talk about DeMar DeRozan, and I think you're going to have naysayers with either direction they would have went. If they would have signed Peyton Watson, you would have said, yeah, but look what he put us over the second apron, how far, look at all the tax penalties we're going to have to pay and what it might do for the future of the team. Well, we moved off of that. So now we signed DeMar DeRozan. Look, I get it. Some people are going to say he's a 37-year-old guy over the hill. I feel differently. I look at it as a guy who's going to come in. He averages 21 points per night over his career. Did Peyton Watson average 21 points even in that month span? I don't think he did. So, I like the move, and you're getting him at a fraction of the price. You still now, with those two added picks, you now have the opportunity to maybe make a move to get off of. I don't know if it's going to be a Zeke Naji. We probably won't find out anything really. I'm going to guess maybe into the season. The Nuggets are going to let this play out. They're going to see where they sit come trade deadline time, and if that's this is what I think will happen is if they see, hey, we're a team that's, we'll call it like a 6 seed or, 6 or lower, which I don't think they're going to be at this point. But if they're a 6 or lower, they might say, okay, if we can move Cam Johnson and one of those picks and get some salary cap relief, then let's see how we can, what we can do, or maybe add in a Zeke Naji and see what we can do. Because I do feel like they're not done. I think that there's still things that they have to do because I know the salary cap goes up a little bit each year, but we have Nikola Jokic next year due for a ginormous raise. And the last thing we want to see is Jokic, contemplating, does he want to stay with Denver or not? That's got to be at the forefront of the front office's mind. Now, the one thing I will say, and Chris, you and I exchanged some text messages when the trade happened. I will be honest, I was kind of out on that limb. I didn't like the trade at first, but as I've read more about it, I get it. The Nuggets really didn't have a lot that they could do when they were, trying. The Walker Kessler deal, again, there's a lot of talk that goes around in the NBA. Of course, that's what they're going to say. That's what they want. They're going to see if any team can fall for it and send them back, 2 first-round picks and maybe a pick swap or 2. But that was honestly, that was probably never realistic. So, look, I'm disappointed that they didn't get a player. But DeMar DeRozan comes in, and I think he is that player potentially. That could be, that, if I look at it the right way through the right lens and say, okay, maybe that's the player that they were targeting all along that they could get, by moving on from Peyton Watson. I really like the way that the lineup looks. I know it's all projected at this point, and we'll see what happens with Christian Braun, but DeMar DeRozan and Christian Braun play the same position. So it'll be really interesting to see which one of those two is going to be a starter and which one of those two comes off the bench. You and I have talked about this before. I feel strongly that Christian Braun is a far better player coming off as a 6-man than he is as a starting 2-guard. That's just how I feel about his skill set, how it matches up against other bench players. But we'll see how training camp shakes out and what the coaches think.
Yeah, there's just a backlog at the wing spot, but we'll get to this a little bit later on. Actually, I want to ask you a question first about the trade itself, because you brought it up briefly. I don't really think there's a question about it. I think it was a terrible trade. The trade itself was just not good. Okay. And that is because the Nuggets were not in any position to negotiate or get any leverage at all. Okay. Like we said, second apron, you can't take back salary in that situation. You just can't. And so that said, I mean, you got a distant first round pick and you got a distant second round pick. Like, whoop-de-doo. Right? This is just not a phenomenal trade if you're the Denver Nuggets at all. And sending him to Cleveland, for 4 years, $88 million. I mean, that's within like $5 million AAV of the offer that you made him. Like at that point, if you're a Nuggets fan, it just feels that much more painful, right? Like you couldn't find $5 extra million a year somehow by moving some stuff around. Like really, it's painful. But I mean, even then, it's just tough to see a guy like Piwak go. And we might not necessarily be saying that a few years down the road if certain things shake out. Maybe his injury history catches up with him again. Maybe he just doesn't exceed that sort of 15 point per game score that he showed last year. Maybe he experiences something similar to Christian Braun, right? Where he has like one really good year. The next year he comes out, he has injury issues. When he's not injured, he's just not playing well. You just don't know. But I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, the trade itself, not great. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the trade itself? It's amazing that Cleveland was able to move off of both Max Strus and Dennis Schroeder in order to make that work. I was actually super impressed by that. But are there any other thoughts about the trade itself before we move on to maybe the front office?
I mean, first off, I'll just say I'm happy for Peyton Watson. I'm a fan of his. And that's not going to change. I hope he does well in Cleveland. And we didn't even talk about this. The fact that they moved him to an Eastern Conference team, I think that is a big deal. I would much rather see him in the Eastern Conference than on the Clippers or OKC or the Lakers or Minnesota. Any of these teams that we're fighting for position for when it comes to playoff time. So that part, I'll give the Nuggets a little bit of credit for. In the NBA, guys get paid, and that's ultimately what happens. We're going to see. So there's some guys who get paid, and Christian Braun is a bad example of this because I think it was injuries that kind of made his regression take place last year. Because I do think that Christian Braun, he was trending up. He wasn't a trending down kind of player. But it will be interesting to see, with Peyton Watson, he didn't have like this long extended trending up period of time. He was a guy who, like you said, he was kind of mid-level, mid-tier type of guy. He got some minutes here and there, but then for that month and a half, 2 months, he was rocketed up the charts, and then he got paid. So let's see now, because with a big contract comes a little bit more pressure. And is he still going to be able to perform? I think he probably will. I think he's actually a great fit in Cleveland. Cleveland was a very good team to begin with, defensive-minded type of team. Hard to say that with James Harden on the team, but defensive-minded team. But I like it for them. I think that's a good move for them. But if he's 23, he's still a young guy. He's not really proven much outside of kind of this 2-month window. So that's the thing. I guess we'll all see it as it takes place. And I know a lot of Nugget fans will probably be keeping a close eye on Cleveland next year just to see how Peyton Watson does.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's a pretty fun starting lineup in some sense, right? You got your 2 all-star guards in Mitchell and Harden now, I guess, right? You got Evan Mobley. I believe he's been an all-star, right, at one point in time. Big rim protector down there. You got Jarrett Allen, another force in the paint. And then you kind of got Peyton Watson, who's navigating both of those realms in some way, right? You can get some shot blocking in there with his size and length. And I mean, he can shoot, right? Mostly from the corners, but he can still shoot. And he was working on his pull-up game, like we mentioned earlier as well. As far as the front office, let's pivot to the front office real quick, because there are a lot of people, again, who are just hammering the front office for this trade, and not just this trade, right? Obviously, just going back through the years since we won the championship, right? 2 front offices, granted, but the Nuggets front office in general, right? Since the championship, you lost Bruce Brown, you lost KCP, you extended Zeke Naji, you traded Michael Porter Jr. away, and now then you extended Christian Brown, and now you've lost Peyton Watson. A lot of bad moves made by the front office over the last few years. And I mean, at the same time, a lot of people are blaming ownership too, right? Like their unwillingness to go into the second apron because of that tax bill, especially for someone like Peyton Watson, right? I mean, Peyton Watson would have literally quadrupled the tax bill. And so a lot of people are calling the ownership frugal for that. But I think that there are some interesting things that we need to consider here, first and foremost. All right. Denver had been building under the old system since like 2016. Okay. That culminated in the championship that we won 6 or 7 years later. Okay. So we reached the pinnacle, right? And we had a very, very expensive team because at that point in time, you wanted to pay to keep your homegrown stars around. So we gave Jamal Murray that extension, that massive max extension. We gave Aaron Gordon an extension. We gave Michael Porter Jr. an extension. Obviously, Nikola Jokic got a massive deal. Okay. You're paying these guys, right, to stay on your team. Homegrown talent in some sense. I get that AG is not homegrown, but at this point it feels like he is. And then the rules changed. Okay. And the rules literally changed in the worst possible way for the Nuggets, right? So if you go back through the offseason, after the championship, you lose Bruce Brown, right? Like 2 years, $46 million. That's $23 million a year. Okay. Maybe beforehand, you might have been willing to pay that if you were the Denver Nuggets ownership. But $23 million for a sixth man with the rules changed doesn't make any sense. Can't do it. You're just going to handicap your roster and your depth, which is something we had already been complaining about that year anyway. And they found a way to avoid, with their 8-man playoff rotation, found a way to make it work. Bruce Brown for $23 million a year was not going to be something they did. Okay. Then you extend Zeke Naji, right? Because you're thinking at that point in time, okay, well, signing free agents is going to be harder. Let's retain our homegrown guys who we have faith in, who we believe in our development staff and in turning into high quality role players. Let's re-sign a guy like Zeke Naji, who's shown some flashes of being good, to a contract that will be cheap in a few years. That didn't end up panning out either. Right now it's become sort of something on the books that's just hard to get rid of, and it's annoying. You think about KCP, okay? Now in his mid-30s at that point in time, a very critical role player. You lose him to Orlando for $22 million a year, and you're thinking something very similar. It's like, well, okay, he's very important to this team, but we have Christian Brown. We believe in his ability to develop a jump shot to fill a similar role that KCP did as a defensive-minded two guard. We're not going to pay $22 million a year to a guy who we can't afford to do that with. Okay, so that's how you lose KCP. Then Michael Porter Jr., who's been a mainstay in this rotation for years, right? Tall, wing, athletic, improved defender, great shooter. He gets hurt in the playoffs. Okay, not really his fault, but he gets hurt in the playoffs. And at that point in time, even when he was healthy, he was really kind of a fourth option on this team. Okay, Jamal, Joker, and AG had all kind of surpassed him in terms of the role that they had and the significance that they were given on that team. Mike's role was kind of hampered. And so that offseason, you're like, well, we still have depth issues. That was shown in the Oklahoma City series. We lost in 7 games. We need to go add depth. We can't be paying a fourth option $38 million a year in the current system. And so we had to move off of him. And at that point in time, it was a fantastic deal. Okay, you save $16 million a year. That opened up the ability to get Hardaway, Bruce Brown, Jonas Valanciunas. You added depth. It was a phenomenal offseason on paper. Okay, then the season starts. You're kind of so-so to start the season, but obviously you can see that this team is going to be solid, and they ended up being solid in the regular season. You give Christian Brown an extension. Okay, understandable. That's just the championship tax. All right, he was a contributor to a championship team. He had a great year the prior year when he was healthy. We're going to pay him 5 years, $125 million. Okay. Literally less than a week later, he gets hurt and is not good for the entire rest of the year. Not that he was necessarily good before that either. His jump shot really seems to improve since the prior year. But at least on paper, you can understand at least why that kind of made sense. All right. Then Peyton Watson out of nowhere becomes good. and now it's like, well, okay, we're going to be in the same financial situation, funny enough, this upcoming offseason that we were in and trying to avoid the last few off seasons, trying to navigate this whole situation. And lo and behold, that's where they ended up. And they're like, well, now we're kind of just stuck. Okay. We've mismanaged this change in the league. All right. We thought initially we'd be able to win with a core four that's taking up the majority of our cap space. That didn't end up being the case. Seems like we needed more depth. Oh, now we've brought in depth that we're paying too much for because we still have 3 guys on our roster who are taking up too much money. Let's see what we can do to try to move some money around in order to maybe keep Peyton. Oh, nope. Sorry. Spencer Jones. Spencer Jones is an important role player. We value role players. Much cheaper. Sorry, we're in the second apron. Peyton Watson has to go. So these are some of the considerations, right? When we're thinking about the front office, like it hasn't necessarily been easy for us in particular to manage the radically different rules that have just hindered us in particular. But what are your general thoughts on that aspect and how the league's change just fundamentally hurt the Nuggets in a unique way, arguably, that very few other teams in the league have been hurt in?
Yeah, the league rules changing essentially at the exact wrong time for the Nuggets, I think is that plays a huge role. But there's something I want to unwind there, and everything that you just walked through is exactly how it happened. The one thing you left out, though, and this probably was one of those things that, for some people it was a huge deal. For other people, it was like, oh, okay, whatever, we'll move on. When they lost Mike Malone and Calvin Booth at the same time, when basically Kroenke came in and said, you two can't get along, I'm firing both of you. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what happened. They couldn't get along. They couldn't agree on the players that they drafted and who was playing what playing time. And he said, fine, we're going to clean house and neither of you get to have a job. That was a huge turning point in my opinion, for the Nuggets. From the standpoint of Mike Malone, I don't care. I know there's the Doug Moe homers out here, and I know the George Karl guys are. Mike Malone's the best coach in Denver Nugget history. That's my opinion. I think he leads the Denver Nuggets in all-time wins. He's won our only championship. He is the best coach that we've ever seen on the sidelines in Denver. Calvin Booth, when he left, we replaced him with 2 guys, essentially. The Nuggets front office doesn't have a general manager per se. They have 2 guys that kind of fill that role. And I don't know if you've ever heard anything about in other sports, to just take away from another sport, but in football, if you have 2 quarterbacks, they say you have none. And I feel like sometimes that's where the Nuggets sit. They have 2 guys trying to do the job of one. And I would be willing to bet you that on their own terms, they are probably rock stars at the job that they do, the job that their title is. But when they have to get together and put their heads together to come up with a decision, look, I know we rewarded Christian Braun, but they didn't have to do that. They did not have to reward him at that time. They could have waited till the end of the season. So it didn't have to happen the way that it did. And if you go back in time and you say, okay, let's just pretend Christian Braun doesn't get that extension and the things still happen the way they happen. He gets injured, the season happens, Peyton Watson then steps up. Man, how big of a different world are we living in as Nuggets fans right now and as a franchise? Because they may have said, okay, well, we've got to be smart about this. We can't give one of those guys $125 million. We've got to break that up into smaller. And I don't know if those guys would have accepted that, but I do feel like one of the reasons Peyton Watson had that $25 million number in his head was because of Christian Braun's contract. And it happened right in front of him. And I think he said, look, I'm at least as good as him. We came in at the same time. I've grown just like he's grown. In my eyes, I'm worth what he's worth. And so that's where the Nuggets really, the front office, I think, kind of pigeonholed themselves into saying, okay, well, what do we do from here? Now, I know we've talked about it before. The Nuggets history, from a front office standpoint, from an ownership standpoint, you talked about it. I know that there's like this idea or this, people are talking about how, the Nuggets don't want to pay the luxury tax. The Nuggets owners are cheap. They don't pay people. That couldn't be further from the truth. You just said we had 4 guys on the team who were basically making max contracts. They did go all in to try and win a championship, and they did win a championship. And then they tried to reward some of those guys for winning that championship with contracts that ultimately, then the rule change happened, and boom, now you're kind of left with egg on your face a little bit, because you couldn't foresee that those rule changes were going to come, or at least they didn't foresee that those changes would have made the impact to the team the way that it did. So I don't know. With the Nuggets front office, in my opinion, I think the biggest thing that they did was that when they got rid of Mike Malone, I feel like Mike Malone was such a good leader. And this is not to take anything away from David Adelman. I think he is a great young mind, a really good coach. But you can see the fact that they've brought in, former head coaches now on his assistant team. Clearly, there's something there that they're saying, okay, well, we might have to move away from him. I'm speculating, of course, at this point. Nobody's ever come out and said that, but that is the image that gives off when you bring in somebody that the rest of the league looks at and says, hey, that could be a potential replacement there. People kind of open their eyes and say, yeah, maybe that is what that is. So, and then to me, the other big thing is, like I said, I would really like the Nuggets to, it's not my money. It's easy to talk about when it's not your money, right? But I would really like the Nuggets to have a general manager, just one GM, just one guy that's out there making those calls. And I don't know who that guy is. I'm not sitting here claiming, that I know who that right person is, but I just feel like with the two-headed monster approach, it really hasn't worked that well for the Nuggets, and I'd like to see something different.
Yeah, it is what it is. You just said something that I wanted to respond to, and I'm forgetting what it is now. Oh, dang it, dude. What you just said something like in the last minute, literally, about, oh, dude. Oh, yeah, I'm alone. Of course. Goodness gracious, dude. See, and Adelman too. Okay. Well, here's the thing. Obviously, Adelman needs some veteran presence on his coaching staff. All right. I was kind of surprised that he didn't really have any of that last year. He brought in a lot of former NBA players, which is great. I mean, those guys are great. Apparently, they're good at player development. Jalen Pickett had his moments last season. Obviously Peyton Watson took massive steps forward, and the team had the best offense in the NBA and one of the best offenses in NBA history for large stretches of last season. And they won 54 games, which I believe is the second best record in franchise history. So like from an on paper perspective and an actual results perspective, there was really nothing wrong in the regular season. Now in the postseason, obviously rookie head coach, you get outdone by a more veteran head coach. That's fine. The team also wasn't healthy, and I mean, the personnel just was not able to stand up to the same Minnesota team that they were unable to stand up to the last time both teams played. So how much we blame Adelman and company for being or for putting us in some kind of position that we're in now, I'm not necessarily in that camp. I get that Michael Malone was a good coach, and I mean, obviously he won a championship. He's, like you said, arguably, if not the best coach in Nuggets franchise history. I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that his way of motivating guys just fell on deaf ears at some point, and at that point, you really can't do much other than remove the voice from the locker room. Getting rid of both him and Booth at the same time might have caused issues, because you're now without anyone. You just said, okay, both of you lose, right? Neither one of you is going to win out here. And that's kind of unfortunate. I mean, I didn't agree with everything Calvin Booth did, but Calvin Booth was the one who, in his first offseason as GM, traded for KCP and signed Bruce Brown. So, we got to give credit where credit's due. But yeah, I was not a fan of giving Najee an extension. There was no reason to do that. So, I mean, it's fine that both of them are gone. Regardless of that, we are where we are now. And to the point about the owners kind of maybe being involved in this too much, like you brought up about what I brought up, they've been willing to dish out money. Okay. The Nuggets currently have the 7th most expensive roster in the NBA. And it might not be a very good roster, but it is still a very expensive roster. And it's in the second apron, hopefully not for much longer. But there's another side of this too. People are acting like being in the second apron is all about the money. It's also about the ability to construct your roster. So I mean, we talked about this before, but like the second apron is so punitive in so many different ways when it comes to actual roster construction limitations. If you exceed a certain amount of salary, right? Nuggets in the second apron right now, they can't do any salary aggregation, so they can't combine 2 or more player salaries and take back a higher player amount, pretty much in salary. They have an incoming salary limit. They have no trade exception access. They cannot do sign and trade acquisitions. They could have frozen draft picks at some point in the future. And it's just stuff like this that you're like, they're also effectively shut out from the buyout market too. So it's like being in the second apron is not just about money. It's about constructing your team fundamentally. You can't be there. So like, that's why it was created, so that people can't just spend money to win. And so I don't really understand the argument that the owners are being cheap from those two fronts. That argument just holds zero weight at all.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. And so, yeah, at that point, we are where we are, right? And so we've got DeMar DeRozan. A few weeks ago, when we did our last episode, we talked about DeMar DeRozan coming in. I think you were kind of like, I'm okay with that. I don't have an issue with it. I was more like, I don't even really know why they're poking around him in the first place. Let me tell you, my entire perspective on this issue has changed after I dug into it a little bit more and stopped drinking the sort of state and national media Kool-Aid on this issue. My perspective has changed. Very similar to yours, maybe. But I'm curious, at least your initial thoughts, right? First, do you like this DeMar DeRozan move? Okay, I'm going to assume, yes, you do. But secondarily, do you think this is that corresponding move that they needed to make? Or do you think that this and another one needs to be made in order to fully put the whole picture together so that we can at least take our minds off of Peyton Watson not being here a little bit more than we currently are?
So I'll start with the first question. Yeah, I do like the move. I think it's a really good move at the price that they got him at too. I think that's actually what makes it a really good move. I still feel like, though, there's something that they need to do from a guard perspective, from a backup point guard perspective. I don't know if they will do it because you just talked about the different constraints that they have with the ability to build a roster. But I think if the right guy is there for the right dollar amount, I mean, really, quite honestly, what we need to find, and that's why it's just really kind of a bummer that Milwaukee backed out. We need to find somebody who's willing to take Zeke Naji's contract and just give that guy a change of scenery. Let him go, be whoever he's going to be, whether he's going to blossom into something really good or, fizzle out of the NBA, whatever that path is. Let's get him onto another team and have him go do that path somewhere else. I don't want to see it be at the expense of like a Strother or a De'Ron Holmes, because I think both of those guys have some high upside. But those are the kinds of guys you're probably looking at if the Nuggets do make another move, that they're going to have to find a way to remove that salary, because I don't remember exactly what the dollar amount is that they're over the second apron, but I think it's less than $4 million, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's under $4 million. And those guys' salaries kind of align with that, right around that $4 million mark. So those are the guys that I think could potentially be on the move if they find the right piece that they're looking for. But to be honest with you, I'm good with them moving forward with what they have currently. And like I said, just kind of waiting until into the season. If something presents itself, pre-trade deadline, then make a move.
Yeah. So I agree pretty much with that. I do feel like they need to make a move. Look, like I said a little bit earlier, they have too many guards now, too many wings. And that's going to cause some rotation issues, right? Because how's this going to shake out? You brought in this offseason DeRozan and you brought back Spencer Jones. You already had Christian Brown on the team. And Julian Strother had kind of slotted in, at least in theory, as your backup shooting guard, as your Tim Hardaway replacement. And that was fine. I had no issue with that. But now you're at a point where the roster, well, just fundamentally looks like this. Okay. At the point guard spot, you have Jamal, you have Tyus Jones, you have KJ Simpson on a 2-way contract. At the shooting guard position, theoretically, you have Brown, DeRozan, whoever's going to start there. We'll see. And then you've got Strother. At the small forward position, you have Cam Johnson, you have Spencer Jones, Alpha Diallo. Bryce Hopkins hasn't technically signed his contract yet, which is kind of strange, but we assume he will, and it's probably going to be on a 2-way deal. So there's that. Power forwards, you got Gordon, you got Najee, you got Trayvon Brazil, and then the center spot, you got Jokic, Bagley, and Holmes. All right. Is Strother going to be the third string shooting guard for the 4th straight season? I don't know if you can do that. Right. He's in year number 4. And when he's been given enough opportunity, he's actually been pretty good. Okay. Several years ago, came up huge in that Oklahoma City series to send it to game 7. Right. So if there's anyone on this roster who has deserved an opportunity for regular playing time, it is Julian Strother. But right now he's behind DeRozan and Brown. And if you were thinking, well, maybe he can play some 3, or maybe DeRozan can play some 3. Well, Cam Johnson and Spencer Jones are there. And you brought in Alpha Diallo. So they have too many wings. So I think they have to almost make a move here. Not necessarily for Najee. Obviously, I'd love to just send Najee and like 2 second-round picks to somebody and say, here, please, just, we don't even need anything in return. We just want to get the $8 million a year off of our books so we can get back under the second apron, and then maybe go out and sign someone to a minimum deal. Maybe like a Brandon Williams, if possible, from the Mavericks, right? Point guard depth. I would love that to be the case. I don't necessarily think that's going to be very possible. And so if I'm the Nuggets, even though I've already lost Peyton Watson, I would still love to try to find a trade partner for Christian Brown. That might put me in a very unique category of Nuggets fan right now, but $125 million for a guy who's going to start and not do really very much other than cut and play defense. Like you kind of said earlier, he's been best on this team in a bench capacity because of his relatively limited skill set in that way. He's really good at those things, but if you can't shoot or even shot create at all as a 2 guard, it's just hard to justify putting you there. So I would love to attach like a 1st-round pick and a 2nd-round pick, and just whatever trade capital people are willing to take, just ship Christian Brown off. Maybe you get a player in return, right, who can slot in some depth somewhere. But I think that would be priority number 1 for me at this point in time. It clears up the bench a little bit, and you can add depth at the point guard spot, maybe at the power forward spot, wherever you see fit, right? I think that's the way I would go. I would commit to DeRozan at the starting 2 and Strother at the backup 2, and then Johnson and Spencer Jones at the 3. Christian Brown is kind of just clogging things up right now. And for $25 million a year, if you could move off of $25 million a year, that is probably going to be an albatross. I would totally do that. But I mean, as far as that's concerned, what are your thoughts on maybe packaging some of those picks that you got back in this trade for Peyton Watson and sending Christian Brown elsewhere?
Well, that's one of the things, obviously, that has been out there kind of floating around, whether it's the internet or group chats or things like that. Look, there's still probably one too many guys on the team that gets paid like a max contract or a very large contract. And it ultimately is going to be Christian Brown. I think you're not going to get rid of Jamal Murray. You're not going to get rid of Aaron Gordon. It's going to be more difficult. So it's, I can see, look, in an ideal world, yeah, I would love to see, them package something together with a couple of picks and move Christian Brown. I think that's a great idea. I mean, you look around the league, you probably don't see many guys getting paid $25 million a year coming off the bench. That's at least not on a team that's already, close to or pushing the second apron or above the second apron. The guys that you pay are going to be the guys that you play. Here's the thing. I do think that the Nuggets, throughout this whole free agency period, I think they have been trying to find that dance partner, and they just haven't found them yet. Maybe they need to, now that they have those tradable picks, that's where we get back to, that that trade, bringing those picks over from Cleveland and from Sacramento, now you have something that you can work with. And now maybe it's the right time to pick the phone back up and say, hey, I know you weren't interested when we didn't have a first round pick to accompany Christian Braun, but now that we do have one, are you interested? And let's see where that takes us. And who knows? Maybe that is what's happening. But I think you're right, and I've said this kind of to a lot of people who I've spoken with about the Nuggets. I don't think they're done yet from the standpoint of, look, they're still over the second apron, and that for all the reasons you talked about, that has to be one of their top priorities, is to somehow figure out how to get out from underneath that, because it literally cripples you. It is a huge penalty to be in that second apron. And if you're the only team in the NBA that is in that second apron, good luck. It's trying to beat, it's worse than trying to, play in the NBA finals with two hands tied behind your back. You can't do it. If there's not a good outcome. And, that's what Josh Kroenke talked about a couple of years ago, or maybe it was at the end of the season, when he said, I think it was the end of not this season, but the prior season, when he said, look, the only thing that could ever make me think of doing the unthinkable is if we were in the second apron, then I might have to consider, how do we move off of that? And that's trading Jokic. I don't think those are words that any Nugget fan wants to hear.
Nope, absolutely not. That cannot happen. So yes, absolutely. They can't be done. They have to move off of somebody in order to get under the second apron, because this is a second apron team financially. It is not a second apron team on paper at all. And so they have to do something about it. That said, it's kind of strange. Like in that trade, I mentioned earlier, they brought in this guy named Julian Reese. I personally hadn't heard of Julian Reese. He was on a two-way contract with the Wizards, I think. So the Nuggets had him brought in as a part of that deal, and they immediately waived him. Okay, for some reason. Lord knows why. Okay, he was on a two-way contract. You had two two-way contract spots open on your roster. And this Julian Reese guy, okay, he was a rookie last year, 23 years old, 6'9", 230 pounds. Okay, played 13 games, a whole 13 games last year for the Wizards. I know, whopping sample size. Averaged 12 points per game, 11 boards per game, and 2 assists per game, with a steal and a half and about half a block. Okay. What's even crazier about this dude is that in his 6th career game, he had 26 points and 17 boards on 12 of 16 shooting from the field. Like, okay, then. All right. Now, he doesn't shoot any threes. He literally did not take a single three at any point in time in those 13 games. But 26 and 17 in your 6th overall game. Oh, and by the way, over the course of the rest of the year, he ended up having 3 more 15 and 15 games, 15 point, 15 rebound games. Like, at the power forward spot, like, I'm not sure why they waived him. He was on a two-way, not expensive, right? Like, does that make sense to you?
It doesn't. I mean, when you kind of outline it as you just did, but I think something to think about is the fact that I think they're trying to keep that second two-way spot open. It's funny because sometimes what's the old saying? You miss what's right in front of you because you're looking too far off into the distance. Sometimes that's what the Nuggets might have had what they needed, and he was already there. We joke because Julian Reese is Angel Reese's, I think he's younger brother. Yeah. But look, when you just rattled off, the stats that you rattled off, that seems like a guy you could definitely bring aboard as a two-way guy. I mean, two-way contracts, I don't think really they're not going to factor much into your salary cap. So you're not going to be paying like some huge tax burden on a two-way player. So I don't know. It does seem weird to me. Who knows? And I'll be interested to see where he ends up.
Yeah. One of the best rebounding rookies from last season. did that in a small sample size, he's got to end up somewhere quickly.
Yeah.
Like I'd never heard of him until this trade happened. But my goodness, dude, like that's borderline bench player rotational stuff. I mean, that's stuff that even rotational guys who are starters don't even do. Like 4, 15, and 15 games in your first 13, like that's insane. So I mean, maybe it wasn't like I don't know, like a rotational fit.
It could also be a testament to how bad the Wizards were. I mean, I don't know. I don't watch the Wizards, so
Neither do I. But I don't care who puts up 15 and 15 for what team or against whatever NBA team they played against. Zeke Naji can't do that. You know, they play the same position. So like, I totally would have taken that. But maybe there's something to them wanting to keep a two-way spot open. Like I mentioned, Bryce Hopkins hasn't signed yet. He's probably going to sign a two-way deal. One might presume. And so you have 3 two-way spots. They added an additional one in the last few years. So KJ Simpson is one of them. That's fine. Bryce Hopkins presumably is one of them at some point in time. That'd be 2. Maybe they just wanted to keep one open. And so having Reese in there would have maxed all 3 of those spots. But I mean, for a guy like that, I would have maxed out my spots, you know, especially when I need forward depth and athleticism. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. So I don't really understand what the Nuggets were doing there. Maybe they'll have like a press conference and someone will ask them about that. But that's just such a strange, unnecessary thing to do, right? At least in my opinion. That said, let's wrap up today's episode by talking about the DeMar DeRozan fit itself. Okay, the one guy who we kind of both just like interesting. The Nuggets are poking around him. That probably won't turn into anything. He was looking for like a $15 million a year deal. At least reports showed a few weeks ago. He'd get him for a minimum. So that's an absolute win. Okay, he is 37 years old. But I mean, dude, like you said, his career average is over 21 points per game. We know he's a good scorer historically, master of the mid range. We know that. Last year, he averaged 18 for a terrible Sacramento team. Okay. But I mean, most importantly, the dude is healthy. Like he's literally in his entire career, which is, I can't count them all up right now, but it's at least 10, probably upwards of 15. The fewest games he's ever played in a season is 60. Like insanely durable, insanely healthy, and insanely good throughout the course of his career, right? Relatively speaking. Top 20 scorer in NBA history. Yep. So, I mean, what do you think about DeMar DeRozan and the fit on this team? Let's assume that he gets, at some point, if not initially, thrown in the starting lineup. Let's say that Adelman does like the politically correct thing and says, all right, we're going to have competition for spots this fall. All right. Obviously, a position battle is going to be the 2 guard. DeMar and CB are going to go at it. We're going to see who wins the spot. Let's say he wins the spot. How do you like his fit in a starting lineup with Murray, Cam Johnson, Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic?
I mean, it should be a perfect fit, to be honest with you. You got a guy who, shoots the ball at an extremely high clip, from the mid-range. So we know the Nuggets love to use the pick and roll, the pick and pop type of rotation. So that should fit him like a glove, to be honest with you. He's also, I don't have his stats up in front of me. I accidentally closed them, but he's, I believe, a decent 3-point shooter. Is he not? Do you have them up?
Yeah.
I think he's he's like average. So
he's like Russell Westbrook, Yeah.
But he's never played with a guy like Nikola Jokic, who is going to be able to get him open shots. So, look, the guy's just a bona fide scorer. And I think what the Nuggets needed. And I'm not saying, hopefully Aaron Gordon's going to come into the season healthy. But you saw, even though we finished the number 1 offense, when we didn't have Aaron Gordon in the playoffs, there was a hole. There was a piece that was missing. And when Minnesota clamped down on Jokic and clamped down on Jamal Murray, Cam Johnson stepped up, but nobody else was able to step up with him. And so I think this gives them a clear veteran guy who they believe can step up if he needs to when called upon. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the other piece is the health. He's just traditionally a guy who's going to show up night in and night out. And he's been pretty reliable as far as last year he averaged over 18 a game. This throughout his career, he's over 21 a game. Look, those guys don't grow on trees. You don't find guys every day that you can sign for just under $4 million a year, where it's going to, on a roughly 15 year career, average over 20 a game in the NBA. I would take that every time. Every time that's offered, I'm going to take that. So I love the fit. I would go back to what you had said earlier. I do agree, though. It's another wing, and so it's kind of created that log jam. That the Nuggets coaching staff is really going to have to figure out. And hopefully the front office can do them some favors and figure out a way to move on from Christian Braun, because I do think that would open up a ton. And then everything else kind of falls together the way that I think it should, if he's not, unfortunately, part of the rotation.
Yeah, I agree. There are many people, many experts even, who do not like this fit for Denver. They feel like it causes too much clogging inside the 3-point line. That's fine. I understand that. But here's the thing, right? What I think we're really seeing here with the Nuggets making this move is not just them bringing in a guy who, 6-time All-Star, top 20 scorer all time. That's great. But they're bringing in a guy who actually really fits their offensive scheme quite nicely. And I don't think people really think too much about that, right? DeMar is a mid-range guy. Over the course of his career, he's become a guy who just dominates in the half court. Okay, he's traditionally an isolation type player. He can shoot the three, like we briefly touched on, mostly from the corner. I think is probably where he's best. Don't quote me on that, but based on the highlights I've seen, it seems like that's his favorite spot to shoot threes from. He's not a great defender at all, so the defense on paper gets worse. But when you're thinking about the fact that the Nuggets, terrible defense last year, top offense last year, won 54 games and had offensive issues in the playoffs, that fills a hole. Okay.
Yeah.
It's another guy that defenses have to worry about besides Nikola, Jamal, and a healthy Aaron Gordon. And back end of the season, hopefully we get him through the entire season. Back end of the season, Cam Johnson, who's a 3-and-D nightmare too. And so the Nuggets, and here's another thing about the Nuggets play style, right? The Nuggets have just, in a league that has gotten more athletic, that has prioritized shooting more threes and playing very high-paced basketball, the Nuggets persist on being a slower-paced team that scores primarily inside the three-point line. They do not take a ton of threes. They shoot a high percentage. They don't take a ton of them. And despite my numerous calls throughout the season for them to take more threes, they just didn't listen. And so, I mean, you can only hope that the Nuggets are going to change their play style so much. But it seems like, especially with the financial restrictions they're having right now, they're just committing to their play style. Okay, Jamal is a good mid-range shooter. Joker obviously dominates the paint. Christian Braun lives on back. Take a lot of shots from the left side mid-range. That's great. Just to dominate in that little range. All right. Joker, Jamal, 2-man game. Cam is perusing the perimeter. AG and the other dunkers in the other side on the dunker spot who can flex back out to the 3-point line. The Nuggets love their mid-range shooting and their cutting and their paint action activity. They love that. DeMar fits that perfectly. And so I think he'll fit in nicely on the offensive side for this team. And maybe Dave Yeager can inspire this defense to, be at least top half of the league in defense next year, which is what the Nuggets were when they won the championship. Okay. They were like 14th or 15th in the league in defensive rating, and they won the championship. So it's possible, but it's the offense that the Nuggets really did need to work on this offseason. Obviously, the defense, too. It would have been nice to see that. But again, with the limited flexibility that they had to make significant changes this offseason, it's clear that they're committed to the path of just locking in their identity to what they know they do well and want to do well. And bringing in DeMar DeRozan, I think, fits that really nicely.
Yeah, I said it before. I'll say it again. You can add a 6-time All-Star, top 20 scorer in the history of the league, to a team that has Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, I think that's a good thing. Now, it does make the team a little older. I get it. But look, veteran presence sometimes does make a difference. And when you look at everything else that was available out there, I mean, I think the Nuggets. I think it's a steal, to be quite honest with you. The fact that they got him at, I think it was $3.9 million for 1 year. It's essentially a vet minimum deal. That's a steal, in my opinion, for a guy who was looking for 15 million plus. So I think it's a win for the Nuggets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I heard that he was talking to Joker and Jamal a little bit offline too. That contributed to this maybe a little bit, but I mean, like, it's here's the question we'll ultimately ask. Would you rather, at least at this point in time, would you rather have had Peyton Watson and no Cam Johnson or Spencer Jones, or be in the position that we're in now with DeMar DeRozan, Cam Johnson, and Spencer Jones?
I mean, I guess we'll find out. That's the beauty of it, is we're going to find out how this all works together. As a fan, look, I guess that's what makes us fans, right? We want to cheer for the guys that we like, and sometimes it hurts to see those guys that we like move on to other places. But that's the nature of the beast. That's how the business works. And we just ultimately find new guys that we get to cheer for and new guys that we like. I mean, tell me 3 years ago, did you know who Spencer Jones was? Probably not. You probably weren't. He wasn't on the top of your list when it came to guys you were cheering for. Now, shoot, I'm bought in. Like, let's go, Spencer Jones. I think we'll find our way as fans. We always do. I'm hoping, though, you touched on it. Got to get Cam Johnson off to a hot start. I think that's going to be a key for the Nuggets, to have Cam Johnson be Cam Johnson from the second half of the season, playoff Cam Johnson, not first half of the season Cam Johnson when we start this new season. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that actually might be my final thought before we wrap up here is, if you're thinking about this comparison, right? We like Peyton Watson because of Peyton Watson's potential mostly. And the fact that he flashed just enough of that potential over just enough period of time last year, to the point where we were like, okay, this is a guy who can absolutely crush, like in his prime, which is in 3 or 4 years from where we are now. We liked Peyton Watson because of his potential. Okay. The front office made the decisions they've made so far this offseason based on track record. Okay. And that's pretty clear. Had Peyton Watson played in the postseason and put up 10, 15 points per game on decent efficiency, maybe even helped get them over that hump in that series, maybe we're talking about something a little bit different, a little bit of a different story. But what we're actually talking about here is, by not having Peyton Watson, you bring in a guy, although he's 37 years old, one of the best mid-range shooters of all time, top 20 scorer, 6-time All-Star, who has not won a championship and would like to win a championship before he retires in the next few years, presumably. You keep Cam Johnson, who you didn't have to move off of in order to make room for Peyton Watson financially. Cam Johnson, for the last 5 years, has been an over 45% shooter and an at least 35% three-point shooter in each of the last 5 years. He was the third best player on a Brooklyn team that finished as the 6th seed in 2022-2023 before getting swept. This is a guy with a track record. This is a guy who in his last season started off so poorly, and by the end of the season ended up shooting 42% from three. Okay. This is a guy who showed up big for you in a game 6 against Minnesota. Had like, what was like 6 of 10 from three or something like that in that game, the elimination game. Showed up when you needed him to, has the track record. The Nuggets front office was like, yeah, we believe the beginning of last season was a fluke. We think another full year of Cam Johnson is clearly worth it based on the track record. Spencer Jones, right? Contributed to the Nuggets being in the second apron. Spencer Jones worked his way up from two-way to starting in the postseason and literally won you game 5 of a playoff series while being one of the most efficient shooters in all of the postseason last year. Proven track record. Okay, so on paper, there's really not a reason to be upset about losing Peyton Watson. Obviously, in the next few years, if Peyton Watson becomes like a top 10 or 15 NBA player, you're going to look back and you're going to be a little bit frustrated at yourself. But I mean, for me, that's kind of like the only reason I'd really be upset, at least if the Nuggets didn't push for a championship this season, right? If they lose in the first round again, you're going to be disappointed. But if they make the second round, maybe win a tough 7-game series in the second round and then lose in the conference finals, I'm okay with that season. I think this is a competitive team still. But I mean, those are kind of the decisions that I'm considering in my head. If I'm the Nuggets front office, and as a fan, I can see that and I can appreciate that. That's going to be my final thought. But do you have any final thoughts from this discussion in general?
No, I mean, it was a great discussion. I think it was a lot of fun. We've missed the conversation for the last 2 weeks, or I know there wasn't a ton of news out there. But I'm glad to see the Nuggets doing something. You know, I can't wait for the season to get going. I know it's, you know, kicking off football here in a couple of weeks, but that just means NBA is right around the corner once football kicks off. So this is a fun time of year. And hopefully the Nuggets, you know, will be able to make some noise. I do think, as I said earlier, I do think that they're still a top 5 team in the Western Conference, which, you know, we saw it last year. Really, any of the, I know it's top heavy with OKC and the Spurs, but really any of those teams, I think in the top 5 could make some noise in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll agree with you. All right, we have some comments that we want to get to before I guess we wrap up today's show. We'll get to this one first that we missed earlier. I guess we've already maybe touched on it briefly. How do you guys think DeMar is going to fit into the lineup, starter or second unit? What do you think? I think after they get through the whole politically correct process of, all right, we're going to have an open competition, I feel like DeMar is going to start this season as the starter. I just have this gut feeling. I just do. Unless Christian Braun has just completely retooled himself this offseason and truly just gets back to where he was 2 years ago, I think you bring Christian off the bench probably. And it's as like your backup 3. And you just work it that way. But what do you think?
I mean, I agree. Like, look, I think best case scenario for Nuggets fans, Christian Braun has turned into, you know, some other type of Christian Braun. He has taken a step. That would be best case scenario, and then DeMar DeRozan comes off the bench and plays that 6-man role. I don't think that's what is going to happen, though. So I agree with you. I think ultimately it's going to be DeRozan who we see as a starter.
Yep, valid, easy enough. Okay, our other comment that we'll get to, hopefully he's featured more in the second unit. Malone and Adelman really failed to develop a bench identity and score, so DeMar should be able to handle that without issue. Okay, so we've got someone who believes DeMar should come off the bench, and I completely understand that argument. Honestly, I've heard other people say it too. It's like he's primarily a scorer. He needs the ball in his hands in isolation primarily in order to be effective. So just give him the second unit. The second unit did not have that person last year and really has not had that person at any point in the last several years. I completely understand that argument. I wouldn't be against DeMar coming off the bench. And, you know, maybe at the end of the day, with the way the Nuggets like to stagger lineups, they decide Christian's been in the system for long enough. We're just going to run back the starting unit, you know, that helped contribute to the best offensive rating, arguably in NBA history, at least up there as one of the best. We'll just run it back with the same starting 5 and let DeMar dominate off the bench. But I mean, what do you think about this? Would you be okay with that?
It's a really good point. Maybe something I didn't think about initially off the top of the head. You know, we always talk about the non-Jokic minutes, right? And how has both Malone and Adelman, they always try to stagger the lineup, right? So we've either got Jamal or Joker on the court essentially at all times. Well, maybe this now gives the opportunity to have both of those guys off the bench because you've got a trusted veteran out there who can, as you said, kind of take over an offense, run the offense through DeMar, and see how that goes. I mean, look, I think there is going to be some tinkering. I think they're going to see where he fits and how he fits best. And I think the comment is a good comment. I'm not opposed to seeing that.
Yeah, spot on. I think we don't give the Nuggets' current bench situation enough credit. I think there are a lot of people who are unnecessarily frustrated with the poor depth of the bench. All right, I understand that it's kind of like a bucket of misfit toys almost, because it's like, well, great, Tyus Jones, woohoo, Marvin Bagley, woohoo, Julian Strawther, I guess, woohoo, type of ordeal. And then you got the rookies in there too, and like Deron Holmes. But if you really think about it, the fact that the Nuggets do like to stagger so much actually kind of makes that not such a bad thing, right? Like if you think about each of these guys, they all have a very unique skill set that Adelman can just plug into the starting lineup whenever he wants to, right? So like if you think about Tyus Jones, floor general, that's his track record. Okay. And he has a whole offseason to work with the Nuggets now to really understand the offense, figure out his role, maybe improve his shot back to where it was a few years ago, where he was actually a pretty decent shooter. Floor general in Tyus Jones. Julian Strawther, a scoring threat, all three levels. He's got that floater he loves to take. Good 3-point shooter, at least conventionally when he gets a regular playing time. And he's a pretty good finisher too, which is something I was surprised to see, especially on fast breaks. So you got a high quality scorer in Julian Strawther. In Marvin Bagley, you have an athletic big who can go get in there and rebound, maybe even get you some blocks, and he can still shoot a decent amount, albeit small sample size, but a guy who's big can get you athleticism in there and he can get you rebounding. You love to see it. Deron Holmes, good 3-point shooter. That was something I was not expecting at all. On about 5 attempts a game, shot 40% in limited sample size. But still, you want a big who can shoot some threes and knock down some threes for you. You got Deron Holmes, right? And so looking at the bench, Spencer Jones, another guy, right? Can't forget Spencer Jones. Solid 3-and-D guy, just tenacious on defense. Another skill set there. And so like the way that they decide to mix and match these guys is going to be very interesting. But there are a lot of individual role player skill sets that they'll have the opportunity to mix and match this offseason, this season. And DeMar DeRozan just adds to that list, right? He makes it tough to decide who you want to play in what rotations. But I think it's a good problem to have, relatively speaking, and it's not as bad as people think it is.
Agreed.
Yeah, valid. Okay, cool. Well, that was a fun episode, running about our normal time now, an hour and 15 minutes. But thank you to everyone who tuned in to today's episode. Thank you for joining us again. We've been off for a while, but hopefully we'll have some more news to talk about next week. If it's not the case, then we'll see you whenever there's important news. And then once the season or like the preseason kind of gets up and running, we'll probably do like some player previews. Then we'll be back to doing every week episodes. So if we're disappearing on you for like a week or two at a time, it's not because we don't love you. It's because there's really not much to talk about. We'll build into some content regularity as the season progresses into September. But thank you guys for listening to this episode. And until next week, we hope you have a fantastic time. Take care and go Nuggets.
Go Nuggets.